There we go. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. If you don't know me, I'm Louise. I'm the Development Officer at Moray Climate. I also have Ailey, who is the Development Manager, and Jackie, the CEO of TSI Moray here. And they're going to help with the chat function. Keep an eye on the chat and take some notes and make sure everything goes okay. We are also lucky to be joined by the authors of the report tonight. So we've got Andrew Heath, Talis Tebow, and Joe Hart here. So they're going to give a little presentation. They're going to talk for about 5 minutes each, I think. We have some slides to share. Yeah. And then we'll have some questions and answers. There's quite a lot of people here, so I thought if we do use the chat function to put your questions in, and we'll try and get everybody's questions answered. If not, there will be a feedback form coming tomorrow, so we do get everybody's thoughts and comments would be really good. So I think we should maybe just make a start because time's getting on. Are you ready to share the screen, Ailey? Thanks. You guys ready, Talis, Andrew, Joe? Good.
Right, I'm going first, and I'm Joe Hunt. I croft at Knockfaddle near Dingwall, and I'm also an economist. Been working in local food development, and particularly work with some of the larger farming co-ops across Scotland for the last, well, quite a long time. Um, I'm assuming I'm going to chat first, a little bit about the numbers in the report. Talis is going to chat for a couple of slides, a little bit about some of the findings in the report and what's missing. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit about what we think might be the direction of travel and to get your thoughts. So this is really just to stimulate conversation and we're not laying down our prescriptive view. We're really telling you what you find and asking you what you think about it. And I'm assuming that you've all read and inwardly digested the 30 page report that we've sent to you. So I won't be repeating that. If we could move on to the first slide, please. So these are the sorts of questions I'm hoping that we can think about. And if you've got questions, thoughts, observations, pop them into the chat box as we go. And we'll try and pick those up after this. Um, I guess I'm somebody who's spent a bit of time working on this report, and I've spoken to a few people about it. This is the first public hearing of this idea, really. So I'm wondering, what do you think of the potential of Moray to feed Moray? Do you find it something that's inspiring you? Is it something that's actually relevant to what your organization is doing? Or is it something you think, blimey, there's other big challenges on in Moray, and this is going to be, may not be possible or may not be top of our priorities. And part of that is there's a lot of different organizations here through TSI, and I guess we're looking also to find out how does what we're finding and talking about here fit with your long-term goals and aspirations. And by that, I'm meaning the next couple of decades, really. We're talking long-term planning in the way that you would talk about long-term planning for decarbonisation in the economy. It's the change of the food sector is, in my mind, sits side by side with decarbonation of the economy. And it's going to take time and short-term actions and medium-term actions and some long-term actions. So on to the next slide, please, and I'll just tell you a little bit about the numbers. So I'm a numbers guy, okay, and I sometimes dream in Excel spreadsheets. That's when I know I've been looking at too many numbers. And not everybody looks at numbers. So we've got some nice pictograms which sum up some of this, but I thought I would dig back a little bit and just try and let you know how we arrived at some of the figures that appear in the report, which seem exceedingly precise and are not exceedingly precise. Um, just before I say a little bit about that, I also thought I would say that Fabio is one of these people who's very good at asking a simple question. And simple questions asked in a reflective way can be more challenging than complex questions asked off the cuff. So, can Moray feed Moray? It sounds like a very simple question. But actually, what we were finding is that at the moment, Moray can feed the world with one or two products, but it's not actually feeding itself with a nutritious diet and is really not maximizing its value in that. So, how do we measure that? Firstly, I looked at national figures. We haven't in this study. I spent 10 days on this study, so it's a scratch and sniff basically when it comes to economic analysis. And what I've done is I've taken national data and then used it to estimate what's happening within Moray. And then we've backed it up with other sources. I've taken, I think, about 40,000 data points in making this analysis. And I've got a spreadsheet with 19 worksheets in it, which I could be happy to share with anybody who'd like to go over it and add to it. Often economists will work on a project over several years and they gradually start to add detail in, and that's what we might do at future steps. The starting point, how much do people spend on Moray, food in Moray, basically is taking the population of Moray, looking at what the British diet is, costing that through by the last year's costs for food, and then coming out with what the spend might be in Moray. So we're looking at something like £23 million might be the spend of Moray. With about three-quarters of that is food that you buy in a shop, take home and cook. About a fifth of that is food that's eaten out. Tends to be higher in cities and lower in rural areas. And then there's food tourism spend, which is usually in line with the number of people visiting. Then we've looked at the amount of food that can be grown in Moray, and for this we've looked at I've looked back at data that I have from our own farm here and from 7 other farms in the Highlands and in Moray to find out what range of produce they can produce, and we've matched that up with the diet profile, and we've come up with a figure that's higher than I thought it would be. We reckon about 78% of all of the original foodstuffs that are needed to create the existing diet in Moray could be grown in Moray. That would obviously include things like dairy and grains, which are relative strength in already, and things that you don't have a strength in. Actually, the fish landings are very small at Buckie now, and some things that the 22% represent things like coffee and pineapple, which you maybe could spend a lot of money building a fancy glass house and heating it, but you'd be better off buying it from and exchanging that with another part of the world. So we've got a large spend, which is going to be pretty consistent because everybody needs to eat every day. And also we have a high proportion that could be produced in Moray. The other starting point really is for the Moray economy, and I need to thank the...
So then you put on top of the water.
Okay, that's a good running commentary. I'm not sure if that was a comment or somebody getting ready for bed. But so I need to thank Scottish Enterprise Business Source for coming up with these figures. One of the other starting points is where's the existing turnover of businesses and the employment profile in Moray, and those are the figures that you see there. Agriculture is quite a large part of the landscape, but it represents only about less than 10% of the economy in Moray. Moray's got a relative strength, in food processing, particularly in the whiskey industry, obviously. But the processing of the products that are processed in Moray are largely sold outside of Moray. They're exported around the world with whiskey, or relative strength such as pig production are actually sent for processing in the Central Belt or in the north of England. If we were to produce the 78% of food that could potentially be grown in Moray and to process that in Moray and to retail that in Moray, then it would mean that about £180 million of the £230 million that everybody who lives and visits Moray spends on food would stay in the local economy. So that's a very significant, and it would then become probably one of the top 3. Producing food for local consumption rather than export could potentially become one of the top 3 economic actors and sectors within the Moray economy, adding on to what already exists in the agriculture and the food and drink sector. So it's a potential significant market. It's quite different to other markets. So it's basically displacing food that's imported from other parts of Scotland, the UK, and further abroad with what can be produced in Moray. So it's relocalization or reshoring of production, and in that way it links into resilience as well. So pop on to the next slide. I'm speaking for far more than my allotted 5 minutes here, and then we looked in quite a lot of detail of what resources would we have to achieve to bring that about. So this is kind of equation that people have done with how many gigawatts of wind turbine power do we have to build to get rid of the coal-fired power stations in Scotland, and then to start replacing oil-powered use with electric use within the economy. So this is resource switching. It's not inventing something new. It's basically saying that we could feed everybody in Moray, or 78% of the diet of everybody in Moray, by switching around about 8% of the existing cropping land and about 4% of the existing grazing land. That is a lot smaller than I had envisaged. I've been working with local food development for 20 odd years, and I think one of the concerns that people have at higher up in the food chain, so to speak, of decision making is that we don't want to have a large local food economy because we would have to shut down the export economy that is whiskey, that is smoked salmon, and that is beef. And actually, I think these findings are saying actually you don't. You could probably carve out 10% of the land area and production capacity and feed yourselves, and you wouldn't have to. The opportunity cost in economic speak is quite low. We're not having to displace an existing industry. Some areas you could do that quite close to hand. You'd need, by my estimation, about 700 boxes of fish a week to give everybody their fish supper. There's only 200 a week landed at Buckie now, but 20,000 at Peterhead. So you may be looking regionally to satisfy some of that. You may be looking at revitalisation of the market at Buckie potentially. From a farming point of view, we reckon that that's about 100 average farms in Moray to their land area, but there aren't really average farms in Moray. There tend to be really big farms in Moray and really small farms in Moray. So maybe it's something like 40 large farms and 400 small farms would need to transition their business into a diversity of crops and added value and local distribution. And there's probably, I don't know, maybe there's only 1/10 of that number. We haven't collected new data, so we can't tell you, but maybe 1/10 of that's all happening. I can think of 4 or 5 big farms and maybe 20 or 30 small farms that are already selling locally. But we're talking of an order of magnitude change, basically. We want to, at the moment, local food producers are often called food heroes, which means that they're kind of achieving it, doing what they're doing in their own area in the face of a very difficult supply chain for them to operate in. And actually, we want to replace its food heroes with local food being a norm again, and that would be a significant long-term transition. But again, we've had a huge transition in the energy makeup in Scotland over the last 20 years, and it's equivalent to that. That would require a lot of new workers to be trained, and we also require new resources to come into investment. We reckon it would probably be something like 40 to 60 million pounds of investment in Moray. That's got quite a low confidence figure. There aren't many places that have actually done this that I'm aware of, and there's certainly no peer-reviewed research that has looked at the effective quantity of new investment. So that's probably an area for additional scrutiny and planning. And those are some of the estimated impacts over time. So this has got the potential to be significant, and it also coincides with policy changes which are happening at the moment, which Talis will say a little bit more about now. Thanks very much. I'll hand over to Talis.
Thank you. Great, thanks, Joe. Joe's talked a lot about the numbers and a little bit about the shape of the food system, and I just want to show this on a map. So this map is in our report, and what it really shows is that the food system in Moray, as Joe's just said, is quite fascinating and quite complex. Because even though there's a lot of farming in Moray and we produce a lot of food, it almost entirely leaves Moray, while what is eaten in Moray comes from elsewhere. And so in Scotland, actually, 93% of food is bought from the top 10 retailers, and 7 of these are in Moray, and they're marked in blue there, up around the clustering around forests. So we've got Tesco's, Asda, Co-op, Sainsbury's, M&S, Aldi, and Lidl. And none of these shops actually have a distribution hub in Moray. So what is a distribution hub? It means that any produce from any farm in Moray can't be received by any of these local retailers because it goes into the national system. And that means it goes to the nearest distribution hub, which is 160 miles away and marked in yellow down in between Glasgow and Edinburgh in the Livingston area, where most of these big retailers, in fact, have their hubs. And it's all of Scotland really is sort of fed from this spot. There is that yellow you can see up near Inverness, and that is a slightly different thing. It's a cross-deck facility, which means it receives and reloads pallets coming from Livingston, marked already for local shops, but it doesn't take in local stock from local producers. So this means, as Joe's mentioned, that the food produced in Moray leaves as low value primary produce, and it's then processed, sold and eaten elsewhere. And value added processed food is driven into Moray and sold at higher retail prices in shops owned and managed from outside the area, and their profits are taken away. So Moray is not retaining the value it's producing at the moment. And in terms of logistics, the food system has lost its diversity because Moray is completely dependent on these distribution hubs 160 miles away, supplying it with food. And let's hope the lights never go out in Livingston. Diversity is really the key factor in resilience, not only in logistics, but also in production, as Andy will talk about later on. But some of you might actually be thinking, but you buy local food in your local supermarket. So the National Farmers Union Scotland did a survey last year when we were writing this report, and it was called Shelf Watch, and it looks at how and where Scottish produce is available to buy. And some shops do have some Scottish food, it's true. But it shows a mixed picture across the different retailers. Joe's mentioned pig farmers. How many pig farms do you see as you travel up and down the A96? And we know it's a lot. So unfortunately, 6 out of the top 8 retailers don't supply any Scottish pork, which I think is incredible. Beef does better. Aldi, Lidl and Morrison's have more than 70% of the beef they sell is Scottish. Tesco's only 23% of their beef is from Scotland, and it sells Irish beef, which if you ask any Scottish farmer, like my Scottish cousin south of Edinburgh, that is a point of highly hot contention, and they can chew your ear off all night about it. So Aldi actually does the best in terms of storing 100% chicken, eggs and potatoes from Scotland. Tesco does not sell any Scottish chicken. So Tesco, Asda and Sainsbury's have less than 10% Scottish produce overall. But there's also a story behind the local label in supermarkets, as it can do a lot of travel before arriving back in the same place. Organic carrots grown for Tesco near Inverness Airport are then graded, packed and distributed by 3 different UK sites, Forres, Lincoln and Bathgate, until they're returned to the supermarket in Inverness, having done a journey of 900 miles, mostly by diesel 4-ton truck. So there is a thriving group of independent butchers, bakers, farm shops in Moray, actually includes Spa, but they're all currently doing only about 5% of food trading. So there's a question here as to whether the just-in-time food system and logistics system that's been set up will manage in extreme weather events and other curveballs. There are countries across the world developing food resilience plans: Latvia, Finland, Switzerland, Germany, Lithuania, Sweden. Since we wrote this report, Tim Lang, who you might know as a professor, food policy professor based in London, has actually written a comprehensive report on UK's food resilience, or lack of, that is available under the National Preparedness Commission's website. And it's really good talk that he did this year in July on food system shocks, what's needed for civil food resilience. And I'd really recommend you check that out on YouTube. So what can be done? Can we have the next slide, please? What the report showed, that there's a missing link in the local supply chain, and that is infrastructure. If we estimate that Moray can meet 78% of its food demand, what's really blocking it from doing this is the lack of local capacity in food processing, distribution and retail. So Moray does have processing capacity, as you'll know, and some of it is complex and highly skilled. Moray can process all its own needs in red meat and baking, but not in other foods. So processing capacity and skills are needed, which of course is an opportunity that we could take. But shifting the resilience on long-distance supply chains that stock local shops from 160 miles away is really the key to making the shift to relocalize the food economy. And the opportunity is here to establish infrastructure that buys, processes, stores, distributes, and retails food, not only for residents and visitors, but also for hospitals, for the public sector, for hospitality, and also the public sector, as in schools, hospitals, and perhaps the army. This has happened already in other European countries, and in the report we cite 3 examples. So in France, BioCoop was set up in 1986 as a co-op owned by the producers, which is unusual because a lot of co-ops, particularly in the UK, are aggregators or they're worker co-ops. But this is actually a co-op owned by producers, which means that all the dividends on sales are returned to those producers. So those producers are lifted up over time because they get an additional income to what they're actually doing with their own business. So it has now 9,000 employees and revenues of 1.6 billion euros annually. And it has its own logistics capacity and regional distribution centres. And Tom Watson, who I think might be on this call tonight, and I have been working on a design for a similar, obviously much smaller model in Moray, based on this as a way to help producers to benefit from joint sales. And we can chat more about that another time. Austria has changed its market structure over the last 25 years, and it has achieved 11 regional chains, which now have 40% of the market. So they've built a chain of regional small supermarkets with its own supply chain centres and a lot of organic produce. And the national government actually put in place competition policy to restrict market dominance, and local government made new planning policies that worked with local suppliers, reduced food miles, and preferred smaller sized shops. And then in Belgium, some of you might know, there was a network that started in 2012 to create a food belt that would supply the food to the city of Liège, which has a population of about 200,000 people. And it supplies schools with organic food grown on land gifted by the city, and European funds have supported processing facilities. So we know it's possible, and it would bring investment and higher value jobs into the area. What's needed is a purposeful, planned, and prolonged transition. I've talked a little bit about how we could build resilience into the food logistics system, but I'll hand over to Andy to talk about how relocalization can actually build resilience into the natural landscape.
You're muted, Andy.
Andy, you need to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Anybody hear me? Yeah.
Yes, got you.
Great.
Hi, Andy.
Right, thanks. Start again. So the reason I'm here is because I used to have a small farming livestock and meat business and doing direct sales to local people. I'm now farming on a much larger scale near Lockerbie, but very, very glad to be talking about an important subject. So the critical benefits of a resilient local food system. There are lots of other benefits as well. I was going to go into detail on them, but I think we'll pick up on that in the Q&A session if people are particularly interested. But it is worth saying that in a changing climate, which we know we've got, the food supply chain is known to be a serious emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So much so that the government is looking at alternative land uses other than farming in order to reduce those emissions. Relocalising our food supply would help us to meet our climate adaptation and net zero targets, but not only by reducing food miles. Teamed up with regenerative farming practices, further climate gains can be made. even moving beyond net zero by improving soil health and storing atmospheric carbon in soils. Now, as you can see on the slide that's up, we talk about some of the benefits being nutritious food from Moray, better human health, resilience to flooding and drought, cleaner water and air, stronger farm businesses, and recovering biodiversity. And that's all just from changing farming methods to something that's more modern, frankly, scientifically developed and beneficial in lots of ways. Now, like I say, in the Q&A session, I can go to all of that into all of that in more detail if it's helpful. But this just highlights the benefits of local food systems and what we hope to get out of it. It's not just about getting one's carrot from down the road rather than the other side of the world. It's also about enjoying an awful lot of other benefits, like improved quality food and the increased health that comes from that. Right, okay, could you change the slide, please? Okay. So yeah, all of that's important because of the wider agenda of climate adaptation, biodiversity, stopping biodiversity loss, and improving health outcomes for people. Okay, so we've got some established local producers already in the Moray area. So this is just now about focusing on how that is scaled up and get near the targets that have been outlined in the report. Okay, so in Moray, a local food system would not be starting from scratch at all. There are already a number of local producers who are not only growing excellent quality food using nature and climate-friendly practices, but also processing, packaging, marketing, and retailing their produce to local people. Some of them are also selling large amounts of quality produce into national and international markets, which is important to note. These are some examples of the local suppliers that I'm going to move on to now. It's not an exhaustive list. There will be others as well. But I've highlighted these businesses because I know them a little bit and because they're developing or delivering all of these multiple benefits through the practices that they use in their farm management. So first of all, you've got Jock Gibson at Edinvale Farm and Macbeth's Butchery. The farm has moved quickly towards regenerative practices during the last few years, e.g. by developing rotational grazing of their animals and stopping the use of artificial fertilizers. They did that a couple of years ago. The farm supplies all of the beef sold in Macbeth's Butchery and has an expanding list of national customers. And it's fair now, actually, to say that the brand is synonymous with quality nationwide now. They've really done very, very well in recent years. And this demonstrates what can be achieved when the supply chains are available locally, because that's the advantage with meat, red meat local to Moray, is that the supply chain facilities and infrastructure are in place. And the result is a thriving local business that's thriving locally and nationally. There is also Carnage Dairy, who are producers of organic cheese, and they have a similar business model and ethics to Macbeth's. They're selling excellent produce, both small scale through a number of local outlets, but also wholesale to international markets. Again, you know, another example of a quality product that's in demand far and wide, delivering for local people with the, you know, the environmental benefits, the climate change benefits, the nutritional benefits, but also at a much bigger scale as well. There is also Limbrett Croft, who I'm sure a lot of people here will have heard of because they are now nationally famous, actually, having garnered a lot of attention in the media for what they're doing. They produce eggs, beef, pork and honey, all of which are produced without chemical use and marketed locally and delivered to people around Granton-on-Spey. We have Cloud Organics nearby in Ardassia, which grows and produces its own organic produce. It also buys in mostly from within Scotland, prioritising the nearest available suppliers of the produce that they need. They then deliver all over Scotland. Very, very locally in Moray, there are two small local organic veg and fruit growers, Mandela Garden and Bruntlands Garden, both of which run veg box schemes retail to local people, and also Rosal Garden, which sells its produce through their on-site shop at the garden, but they also wholesale to 5 local food businesses as well. So they've diversified their output, or their market. For baking, there are 2 small local bakeries which are producing excellent bread, very, very good quality. These are Bruntlands Bread and Love That Loaf, both organic flour, much of which comes from a company called Scotland the Bread. which are based in Fife, and they're a CIC. Love That Loaf have done extremely well recently in both the Great Taste Awards and the Scottish Bread Championships. Both businesses are recent startups and have grown very, very quickly, demonstrating the demand for quality produce in the local area. Love That Loaf have actually sold 16,000 baked items in their first year, which I thought was a tremendous achievement. Okay, so like I said, that list won't cover all of the people that are doing this kind of farming and produce at local scale, but it does give a flavour of what's already taking place in Moray. Okay, it's worth making the point all these businesses are succeeding despite the fact that they're operating within a food system which is not set up to support, is not really favourable to them at all because of their status as small businesses. For new small local businesses to thrive, a new business environment must be created.
Well, I think that was a dramatically dropped mic from Andy there. So maybe we'll just move on to Q&A and hope he comes back and joins us.
I'm back, Joe. Joe, I'm
All
back.
right, well done.
Okay, so let me finish off. I'm nearly done. Okay, so we need an environment where processing facilities and distribution hubs are available to support local food enterprises, where training in new farming methods and new skills for staff are signposted and provided, where finance and business institutions understand the opportunities and benefits of food business at local scale. If all of this happened, if this was possible, then Moray could certainly start to feed Moray and move towards producing 78% of the food needed using just 10% of the available farmland, with all of the economic, climate adaptation and other benefits that this report describes. And that's me. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very, very much, all of you. That was great. Somebody's asking for the links in the chat to the businesses and to the EU projects. Is that something we can send on, or are they in the report?
I would think we can manage that, maybe not straight away, but certainly
No, that's
later.
okay. Yeah, we can send them out later. Thank you very much. So we have some questions. The first one is, how diverse could the food grown in Moray be, and what would need to be done for these crops to be grown here? And would climate change benefit diversification? Who would like to answer that?
I'll pick up a bit on that, as I was covering that in the report. Well, I'll start by just with my own experience. We have a croft at Knockfarrell, and I started growing there 20 years ago, and in that time our growing season is extended by 3 weeks in the year, which is due to climate change, which has both extended the season that we can supply and increased the range of crops that we can grow. And we currently produce 81 different types of fruit and vegetable at 600-foot elevation, and the same latitude as Elgin. So it is technically possible to grow a very wide range of products, and that range is extending. There's a very interesting report recently on the impacts on tree growth in Scotland. And we've probably got something like a 40-year period in which we're going to see increased ranges of crops growing in Scotland, as the climate change is basically driving the latitude about 60 meters every day coming north, and that is going to continue. So that's going to give us a favourable growing window for about the next 40 years. It then may become more difficult due to water shortages and heat stress after that, and that will certainly be experienced in areas that are currently supplying a large proportion of fresh produce into the UK. Southern Spain, for instance, which relies on snowmelt from the Sierra Mountains for a lot of the production of fruit and vegetables, and tunnel fruit, is going to probably end within the next 15 years. So it's not just, and we're thinking here, this is a resilience issue, really. It's not just it would be nice if this would happen, or that it would be economically beneficial if this investment would be made. It's also pointing to the fact that it would be, where might our food come from in 20 years' time if that continues in other places?
They won't hear.
May I hear it? I want to hear it.
Yeah, you can try. It's very difficult.
Hi, can
Okay.
you please mute if you're not talking?
So the range, and that's what's technically possible. What's actually constraining people from growing this range of produce is less what's technically possible. Although actually finding the right equipment and people with the skills to grow it is still in short supply in Scotland. It's actually more to do with the price points that are in supermarkets. And I'll give you one example of cucumbers. We grow about 600 cucumbers a week. If I sell them at a farmer's market, I was selling them yesterday at Dornoch Market for £1 for a cucumber. If I sell it through our veg box scheme, it's worth about 80p to me. If I sell it to McLeod Organics for them to distribute to local hotels, they pay me 60p for it. But we had a glut a couple of years ago, and we had 1,200 spare cucumbers each week for one summer. The regional distributors, Williamson's and Swanson's, they would only give me 23p for that cucumber because that's the price they could buy it in from Holland. So what's actually stopping a lot of these crops being bought is that there are large-scale specialists in other countries who are producing particular crops at lower price points than we would produce them in Moray. And I think it's more of a market issue than a technical production issue that's actually the barrier to scaling up.
Thanks. What else have we got? We had, is there public sector or HORECA interest locally in the discussed concept?
Well, they've paid for this. This entire idea has been supported by TSI Moray, and that's so. I think that suggests that there is interest in among local public bodies. National government are setting targets and guidelines that addresses the issue of food production at local scale. There are objectives coming from central government around increasing local food production, and there are some very interesting projects taking place as well, where local food is being fed into what's being called anchor institutions. For example, deer venison that is now being provided to schools in Argyll. That's just one example. There are others, but the venison is wild shot locally, processed locally, and distributed to the schools. There's a contract between the estates that are doing that and the local public authorities. So I think yes, is a basic answer is that there is interest.
I'll just add to that on two national strategies, two national changes of policy which are taking place as background to all of this. The first one is the Agriculture and Rural Communities Bill, which was made in Act last year, and the statutory instruments for that, there's probably going to be 5 of them, are currently being drafted and will appear before the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee this autumn, and they will set the areas of spend for agricultural support probably for the next 20 years. So that is an opportunity to change the rules, basically. There is £42 million a year of agricultural subsidy coming into to 1,070 farms in Moray. And if you could regionalise, say, 10% of that money, a pot of £4 million a year, that would provide the new investment support that would be needed to start building some of this key infrastructure. And strikes me as the kind of reallocation of funds, not new money, but the reallocation of funds, so that rather than simply concentrating on propping up farming businesses, you're actually making the creation of facilities to add value and to provide local sourcing. So that's an opportunity that's live at the moment, and if you have influences or thoughts and opportunity to influence that will be up for debate at committee stage later this autumn. The second one is the Good Food Nation Act, which was passed 2 years ago, and in September next month, actually, there will be the launch of the Scottish Food Commission, and there's every public authority, particularly health boards and local authorities, will have 2 years in which to write a good food action plan. And I wonder what steps Moray Council are taking on that. I've had some discussions with Highland Council and Highland Health Board about what they're doing. And it's an opportunity to try and link together some of the sectors. It strikes me there's quite a lot of interest from public sector about achieving outcomes which have better health actions, that have better health outcomes, or lower carbon outcomes, or greater local economic outcomes, but they've not yet been translated into practical actions in which businesses in the local area can actually take part. So those are two live opportunities that will be running over the next year or two, and I think this is a good time to come forward with ideas and groups of people, groups of businesses and organizations who think that they could take on new types of supply if some of the resources were reallocated to make that possible.
Hope you guys kind of hear all the seagulls that I can hear out there. Out of interest, what % of land is used for whisky production? That's an interesting one. Do we know?
At the moment, it's about 40% of all of the arable land in Moray is in whisky production. It was in barley production and carbohydrate production. It's only supplying about 1/3 of the carbohydrates that are going into Moray's distilleries. The rest is either coming from Aberdeenshire or for the pot distillers. Quite a lot of it's coming in as French maize because it's the cheapest form of carbohydrate that's available at the moment. So it is a very significant, that proportion of land occupation is pretty consistent. That's not changed. The sales value of whisky has doubled in the last 11 years, but actually the land production area in Scotland has remained static. And that's partly because whisky producers are creating more expensive whiskies, because that's where the market growth is at the moment, but also because they are bringing in cheap carbohydrates from other places. What's changed most, actually, in terms of land use in Moray and Highland for arable land, for crop production land, is the creation of biofuels for anaerobic digester plants. So there have been 17 AD plants which have been given planning permission, I think 11 of which have been developed on large farms in Moray. And they are now currently occupying across Scotland 11% of the total arable area. So actually the biggest competitor essentially for using land that could be used for growing food crops at the moment is in the biofuel sector. And that's come about not because farms think, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to grow some biofuels? It's because the Ofgem has been offering 20-year contracts for the gas that is produced in AD plants, and it has a high unit cost, and it has a 20-year contract with an index-linked price point to it. So it's a very stable market for large-scale arable producers to move into. And there's now an underground pipeline that runs from Inverness through to Peterhead that collects from 27 AD plants en route, and they all pipe their gas into that, and it gets mixed in at 3% of the mix that comes in from natural gas or methane coming in from the North Sea. So it's interesting that very large scale change, 10% of the arable area of Scotland, has happened in the last 10 years, and we've not really noticed it. It's not had a sort of negative impact in other areas of farming, or it's not displaced large areas of food production value. And that suggests to me that you could do the same with local food. You could have 10% of the land area come in, and it would not threaten the existing land uses or dominance of whisky as an adder of value in farm products.
Thanks. Do we address public sector procurement for schools, hospital, etc., and have Forestry Land Scotland engaged with their venison larders and active deer management activity? Can anybody answer that one? Is that maybe just a general?
We've not gathered any new data on that. We have looked at the volumes of spend in the Moray School Service and with Campion Health Board, but we haven't looked in any great detail there. I mean, I think that's a secondary stage of investigation. That's the kind of issue that you look at supply lines, basically. As we've shown with most of the food that's sold in Moray, supply chain is that it's the primary products are produced in the area. They're then exported for processing and packaging, and then they come back as a product that's 10 or 20 times the value of the product that left for us to buy in shops. So that's, if you were to take one sector of that, then you could start looking at what infrastructure would you need, who would be your main customers in that, what would the volumes be, and how could you retain more of that adding of value within the local economy. We haven't dug into that. We've basically taken the existing data sets to answer the question, can Moray feed Moray? And this is really a question of how would Moray feed Moray? And that's possibly the next question.
Well, I think the next question sort of leading on would be, is there a time frame envisioned for the transition? Does this depend on, like, where we're going to get the money? How much is it all going to cost? Joe?
For me, okay, I mean, it's reallocation of existing resources. I don't think you need to spend any additional money to achieve this, but you just need to reallocate some resources which are doing less useful things at the moment. Okay, so farm subsidies that prop up farm businesses for which their market is shrinking and protect them against that are not really in the long-term interests of farmers. They'll keep the farm going, but they will not put it into a position to supply a food product that's healthier or has a higher margin on it. And also giving it to individual businesses when actually a lot of these things take place need infrastructure. It's often the processing and the points, the reduction in the numbers of abattoirs, for instance, is a key problem when you're producing so much livestock in the area that you can't actually get it from the field onto people's plates. So I think some of it's about reallocation, some of it's about aggregation, which means that it actually goes through as a group activity rather than to individual businesses. And some of it, again, I go back to the example of the decarbonisation of the electricity grid in Scotland. That hasn't happened just because people thought it was a good idea. It's happened because the government had said renewable energy in its development stage is going to cost more, and therefore we're going to offer a strike price for renewable energy that started off at about 60% more than producing it with coal. But once it got up to a position where you had about 20% of renewable energy being produced in Scotland, then the price actually slid, and it's now turned out to be cheaper than coal or oil or natural gas or nuclear. So you have an adoption curve, basically, which typically lasts for about 15 years during these periods when you're making additional collective investment and you're having a higher startup price because you've got small scale and you're in transition. But that's been managed in other areas of the low carbon economy. That's been managed through spreading that across all electricity consumers, for instance. Whereas with food, you're basically saying, if you want local food, if you want a healthier food, then you're just going to have to pay more for it. And that's okay if you've got enough money to pay for it, but most people don't. It's also means that small individual, I cannot expand my business at the moment with Mycroft because I'm basically got the max. I've got 200 customers who get weekly veg boxes from it, and we go to about 70 farmers markets a year. We can't do anymore. If I wanted to expand my business, or somebody else wanted to set up a business equivalent to mine and it wanted to get larger, then they would need to have access to the places where food is largely bought, which is supermarkets. So one of the places I would suggest starting this conversation would possibly be with the co-op, because they do have their cross-deck distribution hub at Dalcross. And they could potentially look at letting that take in and do site grabs for individual local food products. So there's opportunities there. But it's going to be a 15 or 20-year transition, and that's why I really highlight the opportunities that exist at the Good Food Nation bill planning, and also with the agriculture bill, because these plans and bills will set the framing of food for the next 20 years. So I think it's a good opportunity for Moray to shout now. Basically, go and see, go with a plan, go to see MSPs, maybe submit evidence to the Rural Affairs Committee and ask to give evidence about what would the steps that we would need in order to make this possible in our area, because it's going to require some reallocation and some different incentives than the ones that exist at present.
I think you kind of.
So I'm not planning on doing that. I think that's what does the group want to do about that? I must say.
Oh, come on. How can farmers unify their sales locally to give more ease of access to locals?
I can make a comment on
Andrew?
that. If it's okay.
You're breaking up a
Uh,
little
this,
bit there, Andrew. Did you want to try putting your camera off and see if it's clearer?
this was sort of the next step in my own. Can you hear me any better? Yeah.
Yeah, that's better, sorry.
Okay, right, good. Thanks for that. So that was the next step, really, in what I was doing with the small meat business. I was running a small van, electric van, doing free deliveries of my produce. And had it been possible to expand my meat business where I was based there at Forest, then the next step was very much starting to do deliveries for the other small food businesses in the area as well. And that was clearly a crucial part of growing the whole thing locally. Really, was cooperating in that way and saving cost and labour. I think for very small businesses operating at a very small scale, then doing things in that manner is perhaps an option. To scale up in a meaningful manner, then the local infrastructure has really got to be there. And a question I wouldn't mind putting to Joe, actually, because it's something that I have wondered about, is whether or not taking the carrots, for example, that currently travel from Inverness 900 miles across the UK to make it back to Inverness. I have always wondered if they were able to be processed and delivered locally, would the cost saving in the transport justify investment in the facilities that would enable that? And Joe will be much better positioned to know the answer to that question than I am. And I just wondered if he's got a comment on that.
The answer is I don't know. It's a very good question. And the reason we have the system, that the food system we have at the moment, is that it carries large volumes of food with very specialist processing equipment. And people, farms, distributors, processors, packers specialize in a narrow range of products supplied at large volumes over large distance. And therefore aggregation is important. You need to run a full van if you're going to distribute things. And therefore those areas, other areas of Europe that do have relatively regionalized distribution and food production rather than national scale food production, do contain all of those pieces of infrastructure within their area. And then they have distributors and they have retailers who carry a wide range of products. So it's about, you have to fill the space that you create to make it stack up. So you have to have an abattoir that's working at 60% or more capacity. You have to have a retailer whose vans are running at about at least 70% capacity, and you need a retailer who is running at something like 80% of stock to movement over a 10-day period. But that's the sorts of levels that you're aiming for at the moment. So that does require. That's why I think somebody put a question up here: do we try to develop one particular food product or sector? And I think the difficulty is doing that is that you end up with just creating one element of that system, and then the van that goes out with that one product or the shop that sells that one product is not going to be full, which is why you need to have a raft of products that are in the same distribution and retail system.
So I think that's I think that's the answer to that question, really, is that some modelling needs to be done on the return on investment of proposed projects, in that if it's possible to capture enough local farmers and enough local produce that can then be processed locally and delivered to market, modelling whether or not that's going to be economic for the investments required to provide the infrastructure. That's the next step in this process, I think, probably from where we are now going forward. I should imagine that's quite near the top of the agenda.
I'm looking at the time. We're running out of time. We've got, I think you've touched on this. Do you envisage a multi-pronged approach, building processing capacity, encouraging local growing production, involving public sector, encouraging consumers to eat local, or work on one and a few things first?
Has Fabio got a hand up there? You wanting to add something in before we finish, Fabio?
Thank you. If I'm allowed, I would say that. Am I allowed?
Is this on the same topic, or are you asking?
Yeah, absolutely. On the question that we're looking at, which was how can farmers unify their sales locally to give more access, ease of access to locals, which was that the local action group commissioned 2 studies on that, and Thales mentioned those studies in terms of a producer's co-op. First of all, finding out which kind of cooperative would help to do that. And the finding of that study was a producer's co-op, where the cooperative is owned by the producers, means that you get your profit from selling the produce that you grow, and on top of that you get a profit from the sales that the cooperative makes, and that makes it far more viable for everybody involved in the growing, and also minimizes the kind of administration, processing, and distribution time that each individual business or farmer or grower has got to do. So that work is still, I think, ongoing, and so that would be maybe an interesting couple of reports to hear back about in a future meeting, Louise. Thank you.
That's okay. I'm just trying to get through all the chat. Trying to get through all. Right. Somebody also asked, will Moray ever got to the point when it can grow high protein plants such as peanuts, lentils, soybeans, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, and other foods that can be a substitute for animal sources of it, which can be difficult to feed a rising population?
Okay, that's to do with energy intensity over a square meter during a year, measured in Celsius hours, for different plant growth stages, and that is changing with the climate. Okay, so oilseed rape wasn't grown in the Moray Coast until about 20 years ago, and that was due partly to new varieties and to a changing climate. Tree fruit is becoming increasingly viable to grow. I've just been speaking last week to a viticulturalist from Kent who's visiting an estate in East Sutherland to look at planting a vineyard in East Sutherland 40 years ahead of it producing wine. So these things are becoming more possible. In terms of intensity of protein, that takes longer, because you do have an intensity of energy to produce to create enzyme reactions to actually build up legumes. But there are, the production of field beans, the production of fava beans, the production of carlin peas, the production of brown field lentils are all now, they're currently around about Lincolnshire and Norfolk at the moment for those products. They used to be in around about Brittany about 10 years ago. The places for producing them are now, the line is around about Lincoln, and in about 10 years time it will be round about Moray, okay, in terms of producing of those. So that is changing rapidly, and you will need to use particular varieties that are day adapted. We grow varieties of vegetable from Alaska, from Saskatchewan, from Hokkaido, North Island, Japan. We basically grow a lot of vegetable varieties which can make use of a northerly latitude. So we have a later growth. The growing starts here later, but we actually have longer daylight hours. We actually grow an Alaskan sweet corn that actually fully crops outdoors at 600 foot up at 58 degrees north. So a combination of changing climate, we probably and seed varietal development in northerly latitudes, we should be able to produce most of those crops in about 10 years time. So we should probably start trialing them now.
Somebody in the chat said that look at the example of home dod. who are growing a huge range of beans, etc. So I'll maybe try and find that link to send out as well.
Yeah, they're in Norfolk. They're leading that trialing at the moment,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
it's spreading further north. There's another two producers in Yorkshire, in West Yorkshire at the moment, who are at a similar stage of development, because literally the line of capacity for building these is heading north at 60 meters a day at the moment.
There's some other really good comments in the chat as well, but I'll try and pull them together. We've just gone over time, so I would say thank you very, very much for your time tonight. That was a great presentation. And like I said, I will send out a form tomorrow. So if somebody's not had time to ask any questions or comments, send them in. We want as much comments and input as possible. So thank you all very much for coming. Bye.